to this week's episode of the Imaginary Movie Podcast, a podcast where it's spooky. And there's 3 times the suspense, 3 times the danger, 3 times as many janky-ass shots of the alien moving around. My name's David.
Hi, David. A podcast host who are 3 times as handsome as usual, which is...
3 times as tired, that's for damn sure.
Yes, although 3 times 0 is, I think, 0. So maybe that's... I've just played myself. God damn it. We're here to talk about Alien 3. Oh, don't leave. Don't come back. Come back, listener. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to make it entertaining. We're going to trash it. It's okay.
This is the worst Alien film. And I say that from my lofty height of having watched 5 of them last week.
Oof, that is credentials.
And the 2 I didn't watch are the unassailable ones, Alien and Aliens. I watched every other Alien movie last week.
Which are definitely up there, aren't they?
They're unassailable, Sam. There's no way that they aren't the top 2 movies in this franchise.
In that order. In that order.
Oh, Alien is the king. I mean, Alien's about 10 times as good as Aliens, which is pretty good.
Yeah. I'm deeply suspicious of anyone who says that Aliens is the best Alien movie. Like, I would start to really challenge
people like Ross.
anyone.
I feel like Ross would probably say that.
Yeah, that's the type of thing you'd do. So we're here to talk about Alien 3. We're here to talk about... I think we've both been on a bit of an Alien journey, as it were. I watched Covenant recently, trying to catch up. I haven't watched Prometheus yet. That's the one I'm still yet to do. And I think Resurrection, and then obviously Romulus. There's quite a lot of these movies. Like, I think in my mind, I kind of just... Alien 1 and 2,
Prometheus,
that's it.
And genuinely, 2 weeks ago, if you challenged me, I would have said that this Romulus was the first Alien movie since Prometheus. I just missed Covenant coming out and being a thing. Like,
yeah, but you've watched that now, haven't you? You've covered.
Yeah, and I think let's do the order. So Alien, Unassailable, Tippy Top, Aliens. I would then say, I can't remember what I said. Romulus is really good, actually. Really
the
good.
New one, 2024. Yeah,
and then it's probably Covenant, then Prometheus and 4 probably on a level. 4's just fun. It's stupid, but it's fun.
Resurrection. That's the one where Weaver comes
Resurrection,
back. Yeah.
And then this one, which is... Do you know what the biggest problem with it is? Like, there's half an hour of a good movie, and then it's fucking boring. It's boring as sin, and it's the worst thing a movie can do. It's an Alien film. How am I bored?
Yeah. I'm not sure I was bored. I'm not sure boredom is the overriding feeling. I think for me it's like, okay, this sounds great. This is a great idea for a movie. Like, fantastic. Oh, we're in a prison planet. Let's explore that. Let's explore that. Oh, the aliens come in, or Ripley's back, and oh no, Newt's died, and okay, let's see the implications. Charles Dance, this is an interesting character with a kind of sordid past. Who's good. Let's explore that. And at every single point, the movie says, so anyway, and moves on. And we're like, hold on, Newt's dead. Are you going to give us anything other than a little bit of like half a scene of Weaver being slightly upset? Charles Dance is dead. Are we going to have anything about that? This was the most interesting dynamic of the entire movie.
Well, let's talk about the beginning of it first. This is one I want to maybe go through in order, because this specifically, not necessarily completely in order, but the very opening of the movie, like you said, we kill off Newt and we kill off Kyle Reese from Terminator?
The robot. Yeah.
Not the robot. He's not a robot. It's the Marine from
the Marine. Oh yeah. Dave, that didn't even register. Hicks. That didn't even register to me that was.
But we do
even a thing that I cared about.
Who's like the survivor? He's really injured and gets put in the tube. Like, it's an interesting idea and I don't even hate the idea to just blow up the last movie and be like, right, we're doing a new thing, because I kind of like that, and then you're not bogged down with like, oh, we've got to save this child again, and. But to a certain extent, I kind of respect it. And having watched 4 especially, I think there really is a lot of scope to just blow it up and do a new movie.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you, right? But they don't even have them there. Just have Sigourney Weaver floating in space, and here she comes. And so what we can do straight off the bat is we can say all of that expectation, all of my false hope that has been raised by this movie is saying, hey, look you remember these guys? This was cool. Let's do it all again. All of that is gone because you don't even talk about it. You just say, hey, she's woken up on a prison thing, and like I think this is the first of many disappointments. Not that I necessarily.
I didn't hate that.
But why is it? But why is it in the movie? But why
I wish
is it in
they'd
the
given
movie?
Michael Biehn. It's in the movie, Sam, because it's an important narrative jump from the last movie that we kind of need to write these characters off. What is annoying is the fact that they couldn't give Michael Biehn like $4. He is not a good actor. He has not been in a lot of things. I think it's Michael Biehn. You couldn't give him like a few quid to just appear in a scene and have a death scene, which would make it more impactful. Obviously, you can't have a kid in it because this is like made 10 years or something. It's made quite a few years after Aliens.
It's 6 years after Aliens.
6 years. So you can't have a kid. The kid reprise the role because she'd be 6 years older, and that would be quite obvious.
We're agreeing, Dave. We're agreeing. My point
What I'm saying is, you pay this actor and you have an impactful scene where he dies, and then I actually quite like the autopsy. I quite like the autopsy scene, and Ripley insisting on the autopsy scene, and is effective. We're cutting up this child to check there's no alien in there, and this is a character from the last movie. I think that's an important emotional narrative beat in this movie, and kind of explains why, again, because if she just woke up on the prison planet, Sam, we'd be having the conversation of like, well, why isn't there a scene where we explain what happened? And do you know what I mean? I think you can't win in this situation.
You can't win. I think the only thing is that we are 6 years after, and maybe people need to be reminded of what happened in the last movie to try and provide some context. But I think what we've learned from subsequent Alien movies is that actually going in fresh, going in without the baggage of the previous films, other than the fact there is an alien and some lore, we can tell some really effective stories.
Baggage is the right word. You've got the Ridley Scott original, absolute banger of a movie, one of the best movies ever made, and the sequel made by Jim Cameron. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
Which also was incredibly popular. I think it's quite weighty, and that's maybe explains why this is such a troubled production. It's kind of like there's quite a lot riding on this. This is the movie that kind of decided whether this was going to be are we going to make one of these every 2 or 3 years, sort of thing, And we made another one after this, in fairness, and we've made 3 more since, but not for 20 years after that. So I think this is the movie, and the studio knew, we need to get this right, and they fucking didn't. We need to get this right so that we can continue to make these movies, and like you said, remind everyone, hey, remember from Aliens?
Go back and buy the merchandise. I think there's a real but again, let's go to my hopeful side. Let's go to my side of I love alien movies. These are fantastic. I've watched a few recently. Let's get into it. Fantastic, great, and we are hurtling towards this movie and culmination. All the things we're talking about and arguing about whether it should happen this way, that way, fine. But what we get, I think, is a fairly good idea. This is a cool idea for an alien movie. We're on this planet. It's full of prisoners, and we're going a bit of a different take on.
It's quite sci-fi, isn't it? I know that's a silly thing to say about.
No,
it is. But there's quite a lot of actually good. I think good, reasonably well paced and not totally expositional world building that goes on here.
It's
where we explain who these convicts are.
I agree.
They cut. Apparently, there was a scene with the shaved head thing is kind of like a thing in this movie that feels inserted because they cut all the scenes kind of explaining that. But I think they do a good job of you being like, I know who these guys are, and they're all basically death row inmates who are now in this weird cult, and they haven't seen a woman in decades, and it's a weird sort of thing just by explaining that these guys chose to stay on this planet after the prison closed down.
There's a texture to all this, which is fantastic. Now, I think you've nailed it to say this is good science fiction, because if the first movie, I think, is a horror film set in space, the second movie is a action movie that happens to be around this alien. And I think this third film is definitely bedding down in the science fiction tropey, lore building, world that I think probably a movie like this really needs to. And if I was coming at this in 1993, it needs to offer something that's different from the first two, because you can't.
Yeah, it needs to become a franchise, and to do that, you kind of need to build the world a bit.
Let's build the world.
And I will say, to this movie's credit, this is kind of the direction that Prometheus and Covenant took, was being much more like, this is the world, this is what we can do with these aliens, let's explain a bit more about it, let's make it a bit more science fiction-y, a bit more of a dystopia. The fourth one less so, because again, that's just fun.
But look at the game.
That's the cue we've taken.
Look at Alien Isolation, which obviously being a video game, they need the lore because you need side quests and you need tapes to pick up and you need stuff to read on computer screen. So like the world of Weyland Yutani and all of that stuff, I think is like one of my. It's the science fiction-ness of these movies is, for me, the joy is imagining how society has created like a company that will prioritize this bioweapon and capturing this bioweapon ahead of all these people. Like, how do we get here? Like, and aliens, like the first one is like shush, and focus on this very penisy monster. The second one is, look, it's her in a mech suit, fantastic. And now we're like, good.
And also penisy monster. And then the third one, we're like, shaved head. And look, it's a penisy monster.
The penisy monster's all the way down. Now, back to my overriding emotion, which is deep disappointment. Because as soon as like we're tempted, as soon as we offered on a plate all of this interesting stuff, I think the problem results in, or the problem stems from it, rather, some just really poor filmmaking. Like some of this is just maddeningly incoherent on the screen. You know, the latter half of the movie, which we'll get to, is in some places just wild. And I don't understand. I literally don't understand the sequence of shots that are being placed in front of me. And so in many ways, you can see the promise of this film, and you can just see David Fincher. Yes, this is David Fincher's first directorial debut. What are we doing, David? I mean, you must have learnt a lot, because the next movie you made was Seven, and that's a great film. Like, did you go to school in between this? Because this is not good.
We talk about production hell, and I think so much of this is kind of like, it's hard to lay this at David Fincher's door, because
yes,
you read the trivia, and again, the trivia is sometimes, but like apparently there were 5 script rewrites before Fincher even came on board. They spent $7 million building sets for the first script, and they weren't finished building the sets, but they'd already spent £7 million, and they'd rewritten it, and they no longer needed those sets, and that sort of set the pace. I think Fincher quit a couple of times and came back. Like, originally Michael Biehn was supposed to be in it, and then he wasn't, and then again there was an original treatment written by William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer.
Yeah. Well, there's the William Gibson script, there's the Eric Red script, there's the David Tuohy script, and then there's Start Up with Vincent Ward, and there's Walter Hill and David Giller's script. I mean, we are just, and this is all the way from the 80s as well, isn't it?
It's a typical kind of movie where the studio, I think, had quite a good idea about what they didn't want in the movie, and everyone who was writing or involved in the direct and Fincher wanted different things, and the studio said no, and there were reshoots. You can tell some of the reshoots, because Sigourney Weaver did shave her head for this movie, but then she didn't for the reshoots, so she's wearing a bald cap, and you can kind of tell where the scenes are. There's a lot of cut stuff that would have explained like a lot of the confusing chase stuff towards the end of the movie. Like, there's more with Charles Dance that got cut, and that seems to be the issue of, like, again, I'm not saying Fincher's some kind of like amazing wunderkind who like had a vision for this movie that would have been amazing, but it sounds like it would have been better than what we got. And again, it seems like the studio was way too heavily involved. Fincher being a first-time director, I mean, even 5 years later, Fincher would have had the cachet to say, no, this is what we're doing, that he didn't have when they made this movie, and that the previous directors, or the other Alien original directors, you've got Ridley Scott, James Cameron, and then the fourth movie's by a quite well respected French director, and like I think the fact that he's again a first time director is kind of like we need to help this guy, we need to shepherd him, and that never ever equals a good movie. Never. The studio getting overly involved does not save a movie. It doesn't improve it. Like there's no evidence to that.
Yeah. Jean Pierre Jeunet, who did this.
Amélie, did he?
Amélie, yeah, obviously, which is probably one of the best regarded films of
definitely.
Times.
He's really, really well respected. And
reading some of this earlier, and again, we're not really the trivia podcast. We don't really get into go and read Wikipedia yourself, listener. But there's a funny little detail about how originally there was like monks or something. They were supposed to be monks, like monastic dudes with shaved heads and hoods and all this stuff, and that Fox, the studio, basically said we should make them prisoners, which left one of, I think maybe Ward left because of that, and obviously Fincher then. So you can see like there are still bits of that are left on the corpse of this movie. Like we're taking bits from all over the place.
They insist on that, and then the writers write around it and have it. Oh, there's these lice, and then they shoot all these expensive exterior shots, which sound great, of like the planet, and we see these lice, and it kind of like visual storytelling. Have you heard of it? And they cut it all, so that we have to really insert like ADR lines being like, oh, we've got lice, so you'll have to shave your head. Like, okay, but why did we fucking slam our foot on the brakes of the movie to tell the audience that Ripley's going to have to shave her head because, well, she already had done for a different fucking movie, basically.
I mean, the lice is a great example. We see the shot of, we see the one shot where the guy's got a coat and he throws a coat onto the bed and there's hundreds and hundreds of cockroaches on it, and you're like, what? Like that's...
But seemingly the studio cut more of those scenes because they thought it was too disgusting. I'm like, this is the H.R. Geiger sex organ movie. This is H.R. Geiger. It's all penises and vaginas all over the place.
The way that... So let's go back a step.
And you decided that you couldn't show cockroaches or head lice.
I know, it's bizarre.
Wild.
So let's go back a step to our theory of Alien 1 is a horror movie, Alien 2 is an action movie, and this is science fiction lore movie. The lore's being made up on the fly. I mean, we're not coming to this film with this grand theory, not even this George Lucas style like retconning, nothing. This is all just being fucking thrown at the wall. And so the lore that we're looking for and the lore that this movie is trying to get into is just made up. And there isn't any this like grand plan. There's none of the things.
Which is fine, I think.
No, it's fine, but you can't base your movie on that. And that gets us to like the next phase of, okay, so now we need to bring in these characters. We need characters. We need a world.
That's where I think the movie could work, though, because you've got no baggage, and you've basically said the elevator pitch for this is it's Alien in a prison, and and they don't have any guns, and that's an interesting idea. It's this prison like foundry thing. So, and that the prison, it's all these rapey men who are in a cult. And there's no weapons. And you're like, suddenly like, oh yeah, well, first movie, the alien's unkillable because the alien's unkillable. Obviously, we ratchet that back in the second movie where the aliens become quite killable, but there's more of them, And then the third movie, you're like, well, we can leave the aliens as killable as they were in the last movie because we've established that. But then, no more guns, no more military, no more guns. You've got fucking lead pipes and forks.
No mech suit.
And that is interesting again because you're like, okay, right. And I think Sigourney Weaver, actually, her performance in the good scenes in this movie is really good in terms of like, this is a woman who's like, I do not want to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes across well. And so I think on paper, I think this movie could really work. Unfortunately, it's so disjointed in its execution.
And that's a big problem. Let's talk about something that one of the other big issues that I have with this film is that we've got this concept, fine. It's messy, it's a bit muddy, and we're all over the place with the script, fine. Some of the direction in the latter half, ropey. Well, let's get into that in a second. But for me, the biggest and maybe first problem that we face is that we've got all these characters, and the characters are like really integral to this film. If you're going to set it on a prison and you've got Sigourney Weaver in, you need like things for her to bounce off and for her to react to. And here comes Charles Dance. And this is, I think, one of a great performance. It's really, really good. It's really detailed, and like there's like an internal kind of texture to his performance here that I think is just great. I really loved every scene that he was in.
He is a solid English theatre actor who, you bring him in, instant gravitas in your movie, and he does. It's kind of his whole career. It's kind of like you bring him in, he just adds a touch of class to whatever you're doing.
He absolutely he embodies this role really well, and I think the dynamic then between him and Weaver in the first half of this movie is the most interesting thing for me. Like, I'm really, really invested in this. I'm thinking, wow, this is like, there's like a weird sexuality to it. He's got this sordid background that we don't know about. He's not a prisoner, but also he's got a barcode, so he's done something wrong, but we don't know what it is, you know, and all of this intrigue and mystery that builds up. It's great. It's really actually really, really good storytelling, I think, because you understand that there's something going on there, but you also understand that these two have some kind of attraction, and it does get weirdly sexual, but it's just, let's handle that in a second. But all this is great. And then the movie just says, nah, again. So we've built up all this. This is the great idea of this movie, and then it just says, no, he's dead. Move on. And I honestly think this is the biggest disappointment of the movie for me, because they just throw it all away.
It's cheap is what it is. Like, again, in a better movie where we've kind of spent a bit more time, perhaps, you need to do more or less. Charles Dance needs to be a less integral character to the Ripley arc.
Yes.
Or he needs to be more. If he's more integral, if it's more developed, it's more impactful. And that's what they're going for. They want his death to be shocking. They want you to shake you in your seat and remind you this is an alien movie and it's going to be eating people. And that's fine. I think it really is, but the movie doesn't nail it. And the biggest way it doesn't nail it is that I really do believe that the script originally said that Charles Dance is the one who Ripley should be asking to kill her at the end of this movie. And instead, they have to have Charles S. Dutton do it, a character with whom Ripley doesn't really have any rapport, because we haven't bothered to establish any, because we were doing the Charles Dance thing. And it feels like a real disconnect of that. Again, that scene with Charles Dance would have been really impactful. They're romantically entwined. There's a rapport going on there. There's chemistry in a way that she doesn't have with Charles S. Dutton, because they're not on the screen together. And that seems like a really simple fix, but for some reason they obviously decided to kill Charles Dance off for this cheap kind of like, oh, the aliens here thing halfway through the movie.
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it.
It's like 45 minutes in. It's not even halfway through the movie, I don't think.
No, you've nailed it with the other Dutton guy who's
great as well.
He's really good, but he's a sidekick character. He's not at the same level as Ripley. He's not a character, I think, that has established himself with the audience, never mind with Ripley, beyond shouting and screaming and being a bit kind of wacky. And I think that's like, if you take that character out and replace him with Dance, or just have him around doing stuff. I think he could embody something really interesting in that. His arc, Dance's arc, is about the fact that he overdosed loads of people and they all died, and maybe we want to pay that off because they set it up and it's like, wow, this guy he's like voluntarily here because he feels this guilt about murdering these people. He's like, there's just so much depth to this and then he just gets cheaply killed by the alien in a pretty, not even a particularly exciting way. Whereas later on, what if he sacrifices himself in some way, so that Ripley can escape, or does something where he can kind of earn, I guess, the setup that we've managed. It's just bizarre. It's just a really bizarre choice. And I think it's the first point when I was watching this movie where I went, right, like that's the choice you want to make. I swear he was going to come back. I swear he was going to come back.
Well, similarly in Alien, when it's is it Tom Skerritt, and he's on the wall, and we get to see more Tom Skerritt because he's being cocooned by the alien for later.
Yes,
you expect that, and that would be something. And that again, but they've done that, and I get again, all the decisions kind of make sense in a vacuum. But when you consider the fact that they were trying to make a commercially successful movie, none of it makes sense. None of it. No. The movie's kind of littered with a load of stuff as well, where all of the inmates are that guys. Pete Postlethwaite, for some reason, is in this movie. What, you couldn't afford to shave another person's head? Like,
give me all the bald guys you've got.
But Pete Postlethwaite's he's like the seventh banana in this movie. He is so far down the pecking order of characters I could give a shit about or who have scenes, and it's like
it's a real
really
array.
Confusing, and they're not distinct enough. I don't think they're distinct enough. Because from a visual point of view, because they all look so similar, because their heads have been shaved,
because they're all shaved, ugly British guys.
And again, you can do something with that, but you kind of need to like narrow it down and have some just. Pete Postlethwaite is just in this movie. Like, it has 3 scenes which are great because it's Pete Postlethwaite. He's a fantastic actor.
Easy for you to say. It's it's really, really. It's a perfect example of like. So you've got all these guys. I mean, I have no idea who they are. I couldn't tell you the name of, the character at the end who's with Ripley, and I think it goes to like the fact that we've got this great idea with the prison thing, but even never mind the criticism so far, like we're not utilizing any of this. We're not actually using any of this cool stuff. We're not actually using any of these characters. Like the prison warden, not the warden dude, the guy in charge, basically, he kind of just moans a lot of the time. He's kind of just like faffing about and not really, like, he's not adding much in terms of an important part of the story that drives it forward. Most of the time, he's basically just saying, "Fucking Sigourney Weaver, eh? What's she doing anyway?"
It's a failure of the writing because he's the leader, but then you've also got the warden, and it's kind of like, but why do you need to split that into 2 roles? There's the warden, who's a typical like very forgettable performance for the warden, Brian Glover, but Jordan's a good actor. It's a good performance.
He's good,
given a lot. But why not combine those roles and have him being the warden and the kind of like cult leader of this prison, and then him and Dance have strife which they kind of do, but you just cut the warden out and you suddenly save 20 minutes of screen time of having this other character in, and we can build that relationship up rather than having all of these white guys who look fucking identical. Yeah. In this movie interacting with Weaver, and a lot of it feels like empty calories of like, we don't really meet this guy properly.
Empty calories is exactly the way it is. I think what you end up facing then as a viewer is you end up facing quite a lot of different ideas, like, and that's, I think, sometimes that's really good in a movie, is that that you're given this array, and it's like, again, lore. Wow, the Weyland-Yutani people, they're coming, they're going to save the day, but there's this prison, and there's also this kind of like culty religion thing. Like, there's all of this being thrown at you. Plus, let's keep track. Ripley's been woken up from hypersleep, and it's just like, okay, so that she's got to deal with that. The robot Bishop's dead. the other Marine's dead, Newt's dead. Like, all of this is being thrown at us. And I think you almost want in the second act of a film is to, if you've got all of this and you want to provide all this setup, is to dial it down. Make it small, make it personal for us. And I think you see that a lot in films. You see it in the way that we are going to talk about what's happening in the universe, and we're going to transfer it down to, Luke wanting to become a Jedi or whatever it is that we're going to. And the film, again, doesn't really want to go that way either, because as the film progresses, Ripley kind of takes the back seat a little bit, and we get a lot of the stuff with the prisoners, like running around shouting at each other, and it's lots of
it's messy. It's messy.
It's lots of scenes of people talking.
On paper, it works. So she crashes. The Marine and the girl are dead. She does the autopsy. There's no alien there. Okay, we're fine. Shaves the head. You have the interaction with Dance. You have the kind of like romantic subplot. The exhibition with Dance. You're like, oh, I really like this character. You know that they've contacted Weyland-Yutani. They're coming to get Ripley. All of that. Then you have the second act. The end of the second act, you have the turn where she finds out she's infected. Charles Dance is like, I don't know what's going on, but there's something in there. Then you have basically the third act being the chase, but do it fucking competently. And you have Charles Dance having to make the moral decision of, like, because Weaver wants him to, of, I'm going to have to kill her and the alien. You can have it be a little bit less of a Terminator 2 ending, but something where Ripley realizes she has to die. Charles Dance realizes that he has to be, he's the one who's got to press the button or pull the trigger. And then you have Charles Dance going out of this movie. Weyland-Yutani arrive, and he basically just throws his stethoscope on the ground and walks off. Like, there's a movie there. All of those beats work in a movie, but this movie is so confused, and the chase is so hard to follow, and it doesn't have any impact.
And just to be clear, you're talking about a hypothetical movie that didn't happen up to this point, and it sounds great.
I'm talking basically, Sam, about what my point there is that they actually have a lot of this in the movie.
It's all
a lot
there.
Of these major beats, a lot of the emotional high and low points are there on the piece of paper. The elevator pitch for this movie works. It's Alien in a prison, and she falls in love with Charles Dance, and they fuck, and they filmed that as well, and we didn't get that either. And fuck you, 1992, Fox Studios or whoever released this. Like,
see, the point,
it's all there on the paper, and they just fucking didn't tie any of it together.
Yeah, but the point being is that we don't get any of this. What we get up, even the point where she's being inspected to see the alien inside of her, which is a great scene, and the visual effects are amazing, and it looks so good and it's so terrifying.
Except the guy doing the scanning is like, and who are you?
It's some bod. This is exactly
and which one are you? Sorry,
which bald monk are you? Because that's where we're at. It's completely, and I think. I do have to say that I think the editing sometimes, again, is all over the place, because we're almost moving around a lot of the time between this. And I think the editing is where you can really anchor some of this and say, okay, it's this guy, and let's repeat his name 3 times, and let's sequence this up so that we can actually get to the point where we understand what's going on. I think we need to move off maybe the coherency.
Do you know what the astounding thing, Sam, is? The credited editor for this movie also edited Alien, Blade Runner.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's not the.
I think
I don't know.
It's one of these things where it's not a technical flaw in the editing. It's a studio flaw in the
shots that they have to work with. Perhaps.
Because ultimately, the editor works at the whim of the director in the studio. So I don't think it's a technical issue. I think it's it's a vision issue of what you choose to keep, and they chose to keep the wrong things.
Yeah, I would agree with you up until the final scene, the final kind of sequence with the doors, which I think is. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk about the visual effects, because both of us were looking at this film from the lens of 1992 or whatever it is, and 92, and being kind of the classic. Oh, these poor people! Look at them; they don't know what they're doing with the CGI. And your initial instinct, I think many people will probably look at this and say, this is early CGI, isn't it? And the problem with that is that it's not. It's not CGI. It just looks a bit crap. If you go on YouTube and look on Alien 3 visual effects, there's a great little documentary that they included in one of the special features, which basically shows you how they did this. And the alien is a puppet. It is a third scale puppet that they are moving arms and legs and tails and everything, limbs with. And then they're compositing. So they're basically cutting it out and putting it onto the shots. Now, the problem is that the composite shots, the way that they've put it from shooting it in the studio onto the actual film that was shot on the day, is just so poor. And there's people who've gone on and done this and basically redone it, and you can see straight away from modern effects. But the problem is that we were doing stuff like this in the 90s. Yes, Jurassic Park's going to come along in a couple of years and blow all this out of the water, but the Alien, then we've talked about this many, many times in the context of Alien. The more you show, the less scary it is. And they show a lot in this. They show more than Aliens because I think, they want to be ballsy, and they've got this great puppet which looks really good when they're just shooting it. But they just haven't made, I think, the technical leap, or they've just done it poorly to jump from what works on the puppet to what works on screen. Because other than one shot, which we'll talk about in a second, I think the alien in almost every single shot looks pretty crap, and that's a massive problem, isn't it? When you're willing to show so much of it.
You're right, it's a problem, and you can tell because it looks quite different. Like, they obviously had several animatronics for different parts and it moving in different ways, because that's how you make a movie. You make one puppet for it to do one thing where it's not moving, and you make another one on wheels for when it has to move. And this is how we used to make movies, and you can tell because there's not enough continuity. The alien looks vastly different in some of the shots. It's quite silly, but I think a lot of it is that you can't put the stuff back in the tube. And we had Aliens where we see the aliens and we see them in full and we see them moving, and it is impactful and good in that movie. I'd love to go back and rewatch that for the podcast because it's been a while. So I think there's some, again, from the studio, maybe some kind of we can't go back to the alien thing. We can't go back to not showing the alien because we've already shown it. Because then people will be asking, well, why don't we see the alien in this movie? So that's maybe where you have the impetus to, and that's just movies, isn't it? It's sequels. You have the impetus to constantly be ratcheting it up
more,
in terms
build
of the
on it better,
in terms of what you can see. Like, we've already had these things running about. We have to have them running about. And four's even more so than this. Yeah,
but to do that, you need to get over a very, very low bar. Composite shots have been done for many, and I don't understand it. You can see the blue outline of the blue screen in some of the shots, and I'm just like, wow, I know it's the 90s, guys, but just paint it out. Like, they painted out every single each limb had like a stick that the puppeteer would control. Amazing work. And when you see it in action, it looks so fluid. It looks amazing. And they painted those out, but they just, for whatever reason, Photoshop hadn't been invented yet or whatever, they just couldn't. It's so disappointing. And now I mentioned there is one shot, and I think this might be the best single shot in Alien franchise history, which is, I know, but I'm struggling to think of something that is just viscerally as impactful as this. Is when, just after Charles Dance has been killed, the alien's in the medical room with them, and she's Ripley's on the right hand side of the screen. She's kind of facing sideways, and the alien comes into shot with an open mouth and in the kind of horrible gooey water that drips from its teeth constantly. Yeah. Well, that's it's
H.R. Geiger, Sam. I'm fairly confident.
You'll know the shot. They use it all the time. It's iconic. And I think that,
it's the mouth
to
in
me,
the mouth,
and it's so close and it's so visceral. And Weaver's doing probably not that much acting to be completely terrified of this prosthetic. And I just think that really, really does sum up my philosophy, which is, don't show us Make it as limited as possible. Small, close-up details, and that is the only thing. The only thing that we should be showing is the small.
It's a victim.
Terrifying.
It's a victim of its own success, Sam. You know, like.
And it makes me think.
It's the Jaws thing.
Yes.
Like, that was a fucking accident. It was an accident that we didn't see the shark in that movie. Because built
it
a
looked
robot
shit.
and it didn't work. No, it didn't work, Sam. It wouldn't swim. They built an
Yeah.
animatronic thing and it didn't work. Like, it didn't run. And so they accidentally looked into like one of the best and most suspenseful movies ever. And Aliens following on the heels of that. And you see little bits of it, and again, it looks really, really cool. But because the movies became so big, it's kind of like people want to see the rest of it. And you've already established it has all of these weird, kind of incompatible traits and appendages because you only had to build the appendage. Mostly, like, it was fine.
Yeah.
You just had to, have an arm on a stick with a fucking sword on the end of it. It's fine. And then
It's
you add it all
massive.
together, and then you have to figure out how it moves.
Yeah,
And then-
which again they did, but they just couldn't get it to look good on screen.
I
It's
just
like,
think
it's
you're
so
on, you're
much.
on a knife edge there, exactly, of like, is it cool? Is it believable? Is it scary? And then after all of that, can we make it work in a visual,
Can we
visual
technically
standpoint?
achieve it?
Can we do all of that? And can we also put it on the screen and have it work? And in 1992, again, pre-Jurassic Park, I think that was so difficult. Something we take for granted now. Anyone can do anything on screen, and it's fine because
Yeah.
we're really, really good at visual effects now. But
Is there a limit? Is there literally a limit as to what could be taken from the human imagination and placed on screen? I'm not sure that there actually is.
and
Other
it
than
looked fairly seamless as well. I think that big studio movies now have so much money, and the visual effects artists and the CGI people are so good at their jobs,
Yeah.
and the technology is so mature that they can do amazing things that you just could not do in in 1992.
yeah, but the problem is that we don't. The end of the day, what matters is what's on screen. What matters is how it affects the story, and I think this is none more represented by the very fact that in the last sequence of this movie, they're trying to, I don't know, I can't.
The Terminator 2 sequence.
They're trying to trap it or something. They're trying to trap it to send it into the lead.
Well, on paper, it kind of makes sense of like we don't have any weapons, so we're going to have to kind of like lure the alien into this like lead refinery. We've kind of established that earlier in the movie. Into this lead refinery, if we can get it into this chamber, it won't easily be able to get out. We can pour a fucking load of lead on it and it'll be dead. On paper, that sounds great, but this film is really bad at visual storytelling, and we don't. I think part of it is that all of these inmates look the fucking same. Part of it is that obviously they've run out of money for the sets because they all look the same. There's no distinguishing features. It's not clear. We kind of need the Ocean's 11 whiteboard scene where they explain what the map looks like to us so that we can follow what's going on.
They have it in Alien 2.
But it doesn't... Exactly. But they need
have
that
the tracker.
so that we are here. We need to get the alien to here. We think it's there. So if we can lure it down one of these corridors, and that's where you have the men separating, and we're going to do that, and we're going to communicate this way. But the movie just can't. They just don't do it well. And
But
I
it's
don't know
so
whether that's
simple,
because
Dave.
of the editing or what.
No,
but it's just hard to follow.
It's so simple. What you do is you put it on a screen. You have a little bloop, 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 like they did in the last movie. They've done this already. It's not that difficult, you know what I mean? I think there's and then you create some visual differences between the characters, or you maybe change the colors. Oh, this is the cold zone, and this is the hot zone, and we need it to go into the hot zone. So if it's blue, that means it's far away, and if it's red, that means it's close. Like
Just have them do more distinct accents. It's fine.
This is
just something.
simple visual storytelling.
tattoos. Give me
Anything.
some face tattoos.
I tell you what, though, I think this is, in terms of just, it's so wildly incoherent. I honestly had no clue. They're shouting, Corridor A, Corridor B, Corridor C, E. No, I mean, like, they were literally confusing
It doesn't make any.
They're confusing it for the
incomprehensible,
characters in
Sam.
the movie.
Yeah.
Never mind us. And I think there's.
But it's also
this
kind of
is
like a
trash
Ripley's just sat there twiddling her thumbs in the middle of it
doing nothing.
for like 15 minutes while we have this back and forth between Postlethwaite and all the rest of the guys. and you're just treading water, and it's again, I think it's just poor filmmaking. Like,
it's bizarre.
Ultimately, you need to. So I remember going to what's a movie called Free Fire, which is a Ben Wheatley movie, and I went to a screening of that in Leeds, and he's from Leeds, and so him and one of the actors came and did a Q&A, and he was saying that's a movie, and he said when they were making that movie that him and one of his ADs had basically made, it's all set in a warehouse, and they basically had made that set on Minecraft, so they could move little things around, which visually, so they could see, and so they plotted the whole movie out on Minecraft, which is silly to use Minecraft, but it's just an accessible,
here's
sandbox.
A tool you've got on your Xbox.
He said it was really helpful to understand, because it's a 90-minute movie that all takes place in a warehouse, and so it's really important to know where all the characters are in relation to each other. So he said we just plotted it out on Minecraft, and it was really easy to visually kind of use the bird's eye view. We can see where everyone is as the movie progresses, and that's kind of what this movie needed. You needed somebody, whether it was Fincher or whether it was somebody else, to understand where everyone was in every scene. Not just because we've got a scene with Ripley in front of the camera, but where is every other character at that exact moment. You need to plot that out because it's all happening in real time. It's poorly explained. We don't know what the area looks like anyway, so it kind of robs it of any tension because you're basically going, what the fuck is happening?
And we're going to shoot it from the perspective of the alien in blurry, sometimes upside down, bizarre camera work, which maybe it's cool in snapshot, but this is oh my god, honestly, it's one of the worst sequences I think I've ever seen in a movie. I just really was utterly baffled by it. I had to rewind it a couple of times to be like, I feel like I've missed something here. It's so poor. I want you to think about one thing you liked about this movie, and I'm going to go first. I liked the very interesting scene where, obviously, we just talked about it, the close-up between the alien and Ripley, and the alien doesn't kill Ripley. And watching this the first time, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because so much of the alien is it's going to kill you straight away, and as soon as you're in the room with it, you're fucked, which is true in a lot of respects in this film, and we get some cool, gruesome deaths. But the restraint of the alien, because we learn that Ripley's got an alien inside of her, that's why she's not done it, which is a great little touch, actually creates the opportunity for more tension. Because then when Ripley's going and confronting her, or it, you get quite a good dynamic where she's kind of talking to it, and you can see that there's this kind of relationship at this point between the alien in 79 and I know it's a different one, but basically it's the same organism, and she's almost going nuts. Now, to immediately just throw that away, the positivity is that they kind of just don't really go anywhere with that again. They kind of go, yeah, it's inside of her and she's kind of got this weird relationship with it, but really all we're going to do is we're going to kill her, and the alien is going to pop out at the opportune moment, and she's going to kind of cradle it in her arms as she goes into the molten lead. And that's the whole kind of point. But I think, my god, imagine having a Borg Queen scene with it. I'm not saying that the alien would talk back, but to have some really let's build this tension to a point where they are confronting each other. The film says, nah, and we move on. But I do really appreciate and liked the promise of that, even though, of course, the film shat it.
It's a cool idea, and they do take that and develop it in 4 in a really cool way.
That was
I
my
won't say anymore because I think it's really cool. It's really good, and it's Sigourney Weaver just proving that she's the queen of action heroes. She's absolutely phenomenal. You should really watch 4 because it's the antidote to this movie, Sam, because it takes some of the things that this movie does well and expands on them and kind of jettisons the rubbish in a good way. I like a lot of the world building in this movie, and they fucking crash the plane, which is a shame. but I like a lot of the ingredients, in this stew. I like Charles Dance. I like Pete Postlethwaite. I like Dutton. I like basically all of the guys in the movie. I do kind of wish you could tell them apart because I know them all from other things and I cannot. I'm looking at them and I'm face blind because it's all just bald white men. And I really like the fact that Sigourney Weaver made $5 million for this movie. That kind of makes me happy because she basically said and they knew that they didn't have a movie without Sigourney Weaver. That I really enjoy that about this. It's kind of like a she probably made scale for the first movie, I would have thought. So it's kind of like this recognition of no, fuck you, I want $5 million, and she shaved her head. They were like, oh, will you shave your head? She was like, oh, yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah,
for the movie grand. Or just generally, who cares? And it's great, and I like the buy-in. I like the fact that Charles Dance, and part of that is just he's such a professional, and he's one of these actors who it doesn't matter because he's been in a lot of shit movies. It doesn't matter how shit the movie is. He turns up and he works, and not every actor is capable of doing that. So
do you remember Charles Dance in Space Truckers?
I do remember Charles Dance in Space Truckers, and again, he
Previous
showed up.
Episode.
He read the script. He went to work.
And he had a giant electronic
not everyone
penis.
Can do that.
He had a pump-up penis. Do you remember this? It had
a chainsaw start. It had a pull start, Sam. A pull cord start. And it obviously ran on two-stroke. It's a wild movie, actually. It just reminded me of that. But again, you show up and you take your job seriously and you're a professional, and no matter how stupid the source material is, and again, I'm not saying this is quite as stupid as Space Truckers. And
in 20 years, you will be rewarded, but handsomely, by a starring role in a major TV show, well-deserved Charles Dance. And he's a household name, I think, because of Game of Thrones. But, it's really faint praise, Dave, to say, I like all the things that this movie just completely ignored and didn't develop.
No, it's not. It's not at all. Again, so much of it is the fact that I watched 4, and I think 4 doesn't solve any issues from this movie. But I think if this had been the last Alien movie to star Sigourney Weaver, I think we would think way less of it than we do, because she came back for another movie that was better, and it's kind of like a better send off. And I hope she never ever reprises her role, because again, I think it's fine. I think 4 movies playing the same character being attacked by this horrible alien. I think the accumulated PTSD on a character after 4 times going through that situation is kind of enough, and maybe we don't need to see any more of that.
Plus, they did kill her at the end of this movie, so I think it is a little surprising, and obviously they just, like a clone or something.
The movie's called Alien Resurrection, Sam. I don't know if that should provide you with some kind of English language clue as to how they resolve that plot hole.
But the ending of this movie, very quickly, I think, just literally just a couple of minutes, because it is so unnoteworthy, is I think it's just it's such a confusing mess. It's such a confusing ending, because I go to that question that we often come back to, is like, what am I supposed to feel about this? Like, movie, tell me, am I supposed to be sad that our protagonist is dead? I'm kind of not sad because she's got an alien inside her. She's going to die anyway. I'm kind of not sad because she's killing the alien and to stop Weyland-Yutani getting it. I'm kind of like, am I happy about it though? Not really, because she's kind of like, it's all a bit needless. There's no impression left on me as to actually what the intentionality of the emotion is in that moment.
Because
the way that
she don't get any closure, because, and so many movies, bad horror movies and bad slasher movies do this. We need the closure. We need the closure of somebody walking away from this, and nobody does, because all the characters we've met have been killed. And this is my fix again. Having Charles Dance be the one who presses the switch, and Ripley dies, and Ripley sacrifices herself, and that's noble, and she beats the alien, and she knows she's going to die, and then there's a peaceful, I don't know, like hugging the alien's weird, but like a peaceful kind of like, do you know what I mean? Like, what they've done. You know what Weyland-Yutani tried to do here. Don't let them Do you know what I mean? I'm petitioning you, Charles Dance, to go on and make sure this company that they do not continue to like pursue this alien thing. And then you have Charles Dance, character we've come to know, kind of not walk off into the sunset, but certainly kind of like a, you know, he takes that lesson away with him, and then kind of validates Ripley's sacrifice, and then that's the emotional end point for this movie. But actually, what happens is even the guy who called Dad and told him that Ripley was going to kill the alien, even he gets beaten to death by these fucking Weyland-Yutani guys who've just arrived. So all the characters we've met are dead, and it's kind of like a, right, so it's a zero-sum game. Everyone's dead. We may as well not, like, what have we learned from the movie? In universe, nothing.
That Weyland-Yutani will go find another alien, and they will...
And I think it would have been much more... Like, I get why you kill Ripley off, and it is emotionally impactful, because this is a character, she's been the protagonist for 3 movies, like...
Since 1979 as well. Yeah,
exactly. For like 15 years, it's a ballsy move to do it, but you kind of need to have the guy who goes on. Not necessarily that we're going to make a sequel with Charles Dance, but you just have that kind of like Ripley going off in the escape pod in number 1 and then doing the exact same thing in number 2. Like, I know you've used it before, but you could have Charles Dance boarding the transport and going back to civilization and living some kind of life, and that being the outlet valve of, right, the movie was worth it.
Yeah, but there's also just answers some of the questions, because I'm thinking, well, surely there's more aliens. Like, it was never just one. You know, we saw that in the last movie. There are multiple, and there's eggs, and they say it's a queen. The queen lays eggs. We see this. We see all of this. Like, so for me, there is a whole fucking pod of these bastards just sitting waiting on this prison. Weyland-Yutani are not going to be that. But, like, why does it have to be the one that's inside Ripley? Because of the kind of weird, like, metaphor of that. Oh, but I think the
metaphor. I think that self-sacrifice is very well established in movie lore, in kind of like movie tropes, and I think there's a way to do it which kind of evokes all the feelings that you want to evoke in a movie. That kind of relief and that, do you know what I mean? That payoff of, you know, I'm going to die so that you can go on. It's usually someone with a child or whatever, or a, you know, mentee. It's but there is that could work, but in this movie it's kind of like and she's dead, and everyone's dead, and
visual
it doesn't fit the tone of the movie. No, because the movie isn't toned as oh my god, the whole fucking thing is a waste of, like, do you know what I mean? It's not nihilistic enough to kind of get away with that. Just being, everyone's dead.
Dave, I'm frowning out of this disappointment, and I think maybe Alien 4 is the way to go.
Watch Alien 4.
And Prometheus and Romulus, which
definitely watch Romulus. Definitely go to the cinema and see Romulus.
Well, I'm going to complete them. I'm going to complete the whole package, slightly out of order. But I think that is the thing, is that, you know, generally these films are pretty good. This is the one that just, this is a bad movie. Like, there's no excusing it. It's bad. It's really bad.
I will say, as a silver lining, like, I didn't absolutely hate watching this. I wasn't like, oh my god, throwing popcorn all over the room while I was watching it.
But that's worse. That's worse, because it's the promise.
No. Let me justify that. Like, this is totally, it's fine. Bits of it are entertaining. Like, I wouldn't say skip it if you're doing an Alien rewatch.
No,
because it's less than 2 hours. There were some good moments, but I think it's more just the promise of what the movie could have been. That we're never going to go back to that well with these characters in 1992 because it's now 2024, and you just made a bad movie. And every time you make a bad movie, and you could have made a better movie quite easily, like, why didn't you do that? You know, it's just frustrating. I think, especially in a series where I think the quality is generally a bit better. You know, the first 2 movies are really good. It's like Aliens is a rare example of a sequel that's really good.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the ultimate sin. Well, we always say, but, you know, being boring, and this wasn't boring, but it certainly is disappointing. I'm not annoyed, I'm disappointed. And that's probably...
I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed, son.
Yeah. It's
my
a real...
son, David Fincher.
Yeah, well, luckily David Fincher's going to go on to have a glittering career and make Fight Club, I think, just a few years after this.
7, I think, is...
Seven's good. Zodiac.
Club's
Ooh, I like Zodiac.
Zodiac didn't grab me. Fight Club's an interesting one, I think. You could really make the argument that Seven is the better movie.
Yeah. Well, we should get into some more problematic David Fincher movies in a future episode. But right now, Dave, I'm going to go, I think, and watch Alien 4. I'm going to try and calm down, redeem this franchise.
You should. Ron Perlman, Winona Ryder, Dan Hedaya's hairy shoulders. My God, Sam, you're watching an ape movie because Dan Hedaya is in a tank top in a scene, and it's like, here's just the last bit of trivia here. Dan Hedaya in number 4. There's a scene where he wakes up in the middle of the night. They shot it with him without a shirt on, and basically everyone was like, we can't show that. This is an alien film with the vagina aliens and everything. We can't show Dan Hedaya without a shirt on, and he's in this vest and he's genuinely got fur.
Ladies and gentlemen, terrifying. See you next week.